It was a bright evening in the city, and the Golden Spoon restaurant was already full. The soft music mixed with the sound of glasses touching and people laughing. Waiters moved fast between tables, carrying shining plates and sparkling drinks. Among them was Maya, a young waitress with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She was always polite, always careful, and even when her feet hurt from standing all day, she never let her smile fade. The manager often said she had the heart of gold, and that was true. Maya loved her job because she believed that serving others with kindness could make a bad day better. She was not rich, but she was rich in patience and warmth. She lived alone in a small apartment nearby and sent money to her mother every month. Tonight, she promised herself to finish her shift early and rest. But fate had other plans for her. At exactly 7:30, the glass doors opened with a dramatic push. And in came Clara. Everyone could tell she was rich even before she spoke. Her red dress looked expensive, hugging her body perfectly, and her diamond necklace caught the restaurant lights like tiny stars. Her heels clicked loudly on the marble floor as if demanding attention. Her lips were painted bright red, her hair was perfectly styled, and her expression said she believed she was better than everyone in the room. Behind her followed a friend, equally dressed in luxury but quieter, almost nervous. The hostess greeted them, but Clara barely nodded and said, "A corner table away from the kitchen smell." Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the soft background music. The hostess smiled politely and guided her to a table near the window. Clara sat down with a sigh that sounded annoyed, even though nothing had gone wrong yet. Maya noticed her right away. Every waiter could sense trouble the moment a difficult guest arrived. Still, Maya took a deep breath, fixed her apron, and approached the table with her usual smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Golden Spoon. Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked softly. Clara didn't look up from her phone. "Sparkling water. Make sure it's cold. No lemon?" she said in a tone that carried more command than request. Maya nodded politely and went to get the drink. When she returned, she placed the glass gently on the table, but a small drop of water slid down the side of the glass onto the white tablecloth. It was barely noticeable, but Clara saw it and frowned as if it were the worst thing that could happen. "Can you even do your job properly?" she shouted suddenly. The restaurant fell silent for a second. People at nearby tables turned to see what happened. Maya's hands trembled a little. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said quickly, her voice soft and nervous. "It was just a small spill. I'll clean it right away." She took a napkin to wipe it, but Clara snatched the napkin from her hand. "Typical. Probably never served real people before," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Maya froze, her cheeks burning. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. She wanted to disappear, but she forced herself to stand straight. She whispered again, "I'm really sorry." Clara leaned back in her chair, smiling smugly, enjoying the power of making someone feel small. Her friend looked uncomfortable but didn't say a word. The air around their table felt heavier. Maya turned around to walk back to the counter, holding her tray close to her chest so no one would see her shaking hands. The laughter and music returned slowly, but something had changed. At a table near the corner, a man had been watching the scene quietly. He was tall, calm, and well-dressed in a dark suit that fit perfectly on his broad shoulders. His name was Ethan. He had sharp eyes that missed nothing and a face that looked both kind and strong. He watched Maya leave the table with her head slightly bowed, and a frown crossed his face. He tapped his finger slowly on the table, thinking. He had seen rude customers before, but there was something about this one that bothered him deeply. Maybe it was how cruel the woman's words were, or maybe it was how quietly Maya accepted them without fighting back. Meanwhile, at the serving counter, Maya took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. "It's fine," she told herself quietly. "People like her are everywhere. Don't cry. You need this job." The other waitress beside her, a friend named Lila, whispered, "Don't mind that woman. She's awful. I served her last week and she yelled about her food being too hot." Maya forced a small smile. "I'll be okay," she said, though her throat felt tight. She picked up a tray with fresh bread and soup for another table, trying to focus on her work. Clara, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the attention she had created. "Some people shouldn't be allowed to work in such places," she told her friend in a loud voice. "It ruins the experience for people like us." Her friend gave a weak laugh, not daring to disagree. A waiter walked past and glanced at her with disapproval, but Clara didn't notice. She was busy fixing her makeup in her compact mirror. Back at his table, Ethan kept watching. He noticed how the staff tried to stay polite, how Maya kept moving, smiling at other guests even though her eyes looked a bit wet. He admired her strength. Most people would have walked away or shouted back, but Maya kept her grace. Ethan's mind began to turn, and a hint of a plan formed in his eyes. He decided to stay a little longer and see how things unfolded. When Maya passed his table, he smiled gently at her. "You're doing great," he said quietly. Maya looked surprised but nodded quickly and smiled back. It was a small moment, but it gave her a bit of courage. She carried the next tray more steadily. As the evening went on, the restaurant buzzed again, but Clara's words still echoed in Maya's head. She tried to forget them, but deep down they stung. Little did she know that the man watching her from the corner would soon change her life forever. And Clara, the woman who thought she could humiliate anyone she pleased and was about to learn a lesson she would never forget. The next few minutes felt heavier than before, as Maya tried to keep herself calm and focused on her work, but her hands still trembled a little every time she passed Clara's table. Clara kept glancing at her with the same sharp eyes full of judgment, as if waiting for another mistake to happen. The restaurant lights reflected on her diamonds, making her look even colder. When Maya returned to their table with the main dishes, she set the plate down carefully and smiled politely, hoping the situation would not get worse. Clara looked at the food for a second and then said loudly, "Is this supposed to be hot?" "It's barely warm." The words cut through the soft music again. Maya's voice was calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll ask the chef to make a fresh one for you." But Clara rolled her eyes. "No need, I'll just eat this. Clearly your chef learned cooking from a street stall." A few people turned their heads again. Maya stood still, not knowing what to say. She wished the ground could swallow her whole. Clara picked up her knife and fork with slow, deliberate movements, as if every gesture was meant to show how much she disapproved of everything around her. Her friend shifted in her seat, whispering, "Clara, maybe you should—" But Clara waved her off. "Don't defend her. People like this need to learn how to serve properly." Maya felt her cheeks burn again. She nodded and stepped back, deciding to stay quiet. But when she turned to leave, Clara suddenly pulled her arm just enough to make the tray tilt, and the glass of juice on it fell forward, spilling all over Maya's uniform. The cold liquid soaked her apron and dress in seconds. The entire restaurant gasped. Clara laughed softly and said, "Oh, look what you've done now. Can't even carry a tray without spilling it everywhere." Maya froze, looking down at herself. The drink dripped from her sleeve to the floor. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll clean it right away." Clara crossed her arms. "Maybe you should clean yourself first. You look like a mess." Her laughter echoed, cruel and sharp. The manager, hearing the noise, hurried over, his face full of panic. "Is everything all right here?" he asked quickly. Clara turned to him and said, "Your waitress just ruined my evening. This is unacceptable. I expect a free meal after such a disaster." The manager's face turned pale. "So of course, ma'am, we're very sorry. Maya, go get a towel now." Maya nodded and rushed toward the counter, tears filling her eyes but not falling. Behind her, Clara shook her head and whispered to her friend, "Honestly, where do they even find these people?" Her friend looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. At the far corner, Ethan watched everything unfold, his calm expression starting to change. His jaw tightened, and his eyes followed Maya as she disappeared behind the kitchen door. The scene felt wrong to him, painfully wrong. He had seen arrogance before, but this woman's cruelty was something else. When Maya came back with a towel, her hands trembled as she cleaned the mess quietly. The manager tried to smooth things over, apologizing repeatedly, but Clara only smirked. "I hope you understand. This kind of service ruins your reputation," she said, raising her voice enough for nearby customers to hear. Ethan finally stood up. The motion was slow but deliberate, and even Clara noticed it. She frowned slightly, sensing that something was about to happen. Ethan placed his napkin on the table and walked toward them with calm, confident steps. Every head turned as he approached. The soft sound of his shoes against the marble floor made the air tense. Maya looked up and froze. She recognized him as the polite man from the corner. Ethan stopped beside her and said in a low, firm voice, "I think you should apologize to her." Clara blinked, confused for a second, then laughed bitterly. "Excuse me? And who exactly are you to tell me what to do?" Ethan looked her straight in the eye. Someone who doesn't like to see good people treated badly. The restaurant grew quiet again. Even the waiters near the kitchen peeked out to watch. Clara frowned deeper. "She spilled on me. She should be the one apologizing." Ethan's gaze didn't move. "That's not what I saw," he said simply. For the first time that evening, Clara's confident smile flickered. Something in his tone made her uneasy. Maya tried to speak. "Sir, please, it's okay." But Ethan raised his hand gently to stop her. "No, Maya, it's not okay." His voice was calm but full of strength. Clara crossed her arms again and said coldly, "You should mind your own business." Ethan tilted his head slightly and replied, "You'd be surprised how much this business belongs to me." The tension in the room thickened. Everyone could feel that something big was coming. But no one knew just how much Clara's life was about to change because of her own arrogance. The manager stood frozen for a moment, not sure what to do as he looked between Clara and the tall man who had just spoken. The air around the table felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Clara's face turned red with anger, and her friend shifted nervously in her seat, wishing to disappear. The manager tried to smile politely, wiping his hands on his vest. "Sir, please, let's not make a scene," he said quickly, his voice trembling a little. "We don't want to upset other customers." Ethan's eyes stayed calm but sharp. "The scene already started when your customer decided to humiliate your staff," he replied firmly. Maya looked down, her fingers twisting the towel she still held, afraid that things might get worse. Clara gave a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, please, you don't know what you're talking about. She spilled a drink on me and ruined my evening. I should be the one angry here." Ethan turned his head slightly and said, "I was sitting right there. I saw everything. You grabbed her tray on purpose." His words hit like thunder. The nearby tables grew silent again. Even the soft restaurant music couldn't hide the tension now. The manager took a step closer, trying to calm things down. "Sir, please, if there's a misunderstanding, we can discuss it quietly." "Miss, perhaps we can offer you another table, or—" Clara interrupted sharply. "No. I want this waiter fired right now. She has no manners, no skills, and she embarrassed me in front of everyone." Her voice rose so high that people turned to look again. Maya's lips trembled. She whispered softly, "Please, ma'am, I didn't mean—" But Clara waved her hand to silence her. "Don't talk back to me. You're lucky I don't call the owner." Ethan's lips curled slightly into a small, unreadable smile. He looked at the manager and asked quietly, "Is this how you treat your staff here? You let rich bullies walk in and throw insults while your workers stand helpless?" The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, please, you must understand. She's one of our best-paying customers." Ethan's eyes hardened. "So money is more important than respect?" he asked. The question hit like a slap. The manager had no answer. Clara folded her arms proudly. "Exactly. You should listen to him. At least someone understands value here." Ethan stepped closer to her table, his voice calm but cold. "I understand value, yes. But what I value most is character, not the size of someone's wallet." Clara blinked, slightly taken aback. "Who do you think you are to lecture me?" She snapped. Ethan smiled faintly. "Just someone who believes in fairness," he said, glancing at Maya, "and someone who doesn't tolerate cruelty." Clara scoffed. "Cruelty? Please, she's just a waitress. You're making it sound dramatic." Ethan's tone didn't change. "Sometimes the smallest act of disrespect shows the biggest lack of heart." The manager looked like he was about to faint. He whispered, "Sir, please, we can handle this." Ethan turned to him and said quietly, "You don't need to handle it. I already am." For a moment, silence filled the air. Clara frowned deeply. "You talk as if you own the place," she said mockingly. Ethan looked her straight in the eye and replied softly, "That's because I do." The words hit the room like lightning. Every waiter stopped moving. Even the chef peeking from the kitchen froze. Clara blinked in confusion. You what?" she asked slowly. Ethan nodded once. "Yes, I own the Golden Spoon." A wave of murmurs ran through the restaurant. People whispered to each other, eyes wide in surprise. The manager's jaw dropped. "Sir, you're Mr. Ethan Cole?" he stammered. Ethan gave a short nod. Yes, and I'd like to know why my wife is being treated this way in my restaurant. Gasps spread through the room. Clara's confident smile vanished. Wife? She repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Maya's eyes widened too, not expecting him to reveal it like that. Ethan turned to her and gave a small, reassuring smile. Yes, Maya is my wife, he said clearly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Clara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her friend looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. The manager's face went pale as snow. Ethan placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder and said, She came here to help, not to be insulted. She works with you because she wanted to understand what it means to serve people with kindness. She didn't have to. She chose to. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from shame, they were from relief. Ethan turned back to Clara. Now tell me, what were you saying about calling the owner? The silence that followed was thick enough to hear hearts beating. Clara's lips quivered, but she had no answer. For the first time that evening, her arrogance melted into fear. Clara stood frozen in shock, her eyes wide, and her mouth slightly open as if her brain refused to believe what she had just heard. Her confidence cracked like glass under pressure. She looked around the restaurant hoping someone would tell her it was a joke, but everyone's eyes were fixed on her, waiting to see what she would do next. Maya still stood beside Ethan, her hands shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it. She had never wanted anyone to know who she really was, not like this, not in front of a crowd. Ethan's calm voice broke the silence. Yes, Clara, Maya is my wife, and she works here because she chooses to stay humble, something you clearly don't understand. Clara blinked rapidly, her voice coming out shaky. That can't be true. She's a waitress. She can't be married to you. Ethan gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Money doesn't decide love, and status doesn't decide worth. His tone was steady, like a teacher correcting a child. Clara felt her face burn with embarrassment as whispers filled the room. Some customers shook their heads, while others whispered words like karma and lesson. The friend sitting next to Clara leaned closer and whispered nervously, Clara, maybe we should go. But Clara refused to move. She forced a fake smile and said loudly, Well, I didn't mean to be rude. I was just joking. You know how stressful days can be. Her laugh sounded hollow. Ethan's eyes stayed on her, unblinking. You call that a joke? He asked quietly. You insulted someone you thought was beneath you. You made her cry and you laughed about it. That's not stress, Clara. That's cruelty. The restaurant grew silent again. Clara tried to hold on to her pride, but it was slipping away fast. Look, I didn't know she was your wife, she said quickly. If I had known... Ethan interrupted her. If you had known, you would have acted different. That's exactly the problem. His words hit her harder than shouting ever could. He continued calmly. Respect isn't something you show based on who people are. It's something you give because it's right. The truth in his words made even the staff stop and listen. Maya's eyes filled with tears again, not of sadness but gratitude. She looked at Ethan with quiet love, knowing he wasn't defending her because of pride, but because of what was right. Clara's throat felt dry. I didn't mean any harm, she muttered weakly. Ethan shook his head slowly. Yes, you did. You meant every word when you called her names and mocked her for working hard. You thought no one important was watching, but life has a funny way of showing us the truth when we least expect it. The manager stood nearby, his head bowed in shame, wishing he had spoken up earlier. Clara grabbed her purse nervously and stood up, her face red with humiliation. I should leave, she whispered. But Ethan spoke again, his voice still calm yet firm. Leaving won't erase what you did, but maybe it will help you think about it. Next time you meet someone in an apron or uniform, remember they deserve the same respect you expect. Clara nodded slowly, her eyes full of regret and fear. She turned to Maya, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, I really am. Maya looked at her quietly and said softly, It's okay, I forgive you, but please never treat anyone like that again. Those simple words hit Clara harder than anything else. She couldn't respond. She just nodded and walked away quickly, her heels clicking against the marble floor until she disappeared through the door. For a long moment the restaurant stayed silent. Then a few customers began to clap softly. Maya looked embarrassed, but Ethan smiled at her. You didn't need to forgive her, he said gently. But you did because that's who you are. Maya smiled faintly. I didn't do it for her, I did it for myself. Hate is too heavy to carry. Ethan's eyes softened with pride. The manager stepped closer. Sir, I had no idea she was your wife. I'm so sorry for not stepping in sooner. Ethan nodded calmly. Just remember, next time stand up for what's right, even if the person being hurt isn't the owner's wife. The manager nodded quickly, understanding the message. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, but something in the air had changed. It felt lighter, warmer, like a bad storm had finally passed. Ethan looked at Maya and said softly, "Let's go home, love, you've had enough for today." She smiled up at him and whispered, "Yes, let's go." As they walked out together side by side, the staff smiled and the customers watched. Them go some whispering about how lucky Maya was, and others about how karma never misses. And somewhere in the city, Clara sat in her car staring at her, reflection realizing that the jewels on her neck meant nothing compared to the kindness she had just witnessed. Clara sat frozen in her car, her heart still racing from what had just happened inside the restaurant. The words Ethan spoke kept echoing in her mind. Respect isn't something you show based on who people are. It's something you give because it's right. For the first time in a long while, she felt small, not because someone made her feel that way, but because she realized how wrong she had been. She had spent her whole life judging others by money and appearance, but in just a few minutes, a waitress had shown her what real dignity looked like. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, Ethan and Maya sat together near the corner table that he usually reserved for himself when he visited secretly. The manager came over nervously, offering to bring something for them, but Ethan shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, it's fine," he said softly. "Just some peace will do." Maya still looked unsure, her eyes lowered as she whispered, "You didn't have to do that. Ethan, I didn't want anyone to know who I really am." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "I didn't plan to reveal it, love, but she left me no choice. I couldn't stand there and watch her treat you like that. You deserve respect whether you're my wife or a waitress." His words made her eyes fill with tears again, but this time she smiled through them. "I know, but I wanted to learn how people really are, how they treat others when they don't expect anything back. I didn't think the lesson would come like this." Ethan chuckled softly. "Life has its own way of teaching lessons even when we don't ask for them." Around them, the restaurant slowly returned to normal, but the air felt different, calmer, like everyone had learned something that night. The staff moved with a quiet respect, and the customers whispered among themselves, still surprised by what they had witnessed. Ethan looked at Maya and said quietly, "You're stronger than you think, Maya. I saw the way you held yourself even when she insulted you. You didn't fight back, you didn't lose your grace. That's rare." Maya smiled faintly. "It's hard to stay calm when someone tries to make you feel small, but I've learned that anger only gives them what they want. Silence hurts more." Ethan smiled proudly. "And that's why I fell in love with you," he said softly. Maya blushed a little, lowering her gaze as her fingers played with the edge of the napkin. "You always say that," she whispered. "Because it's always true," Ethan replied. The manager approached again, this time with 2 cups of hot chocolate on a tray. "Please, sir and ma'am, it's from the staff. They wanted to do something nice," he said with a nervous smile. Maya looked touched. "That's very sweet of them, thank you," she said gently. The manager nodded and stepped back, watching them with quiet respect. Ethan lifted his cup slightly and said, "To kindness even when it's not returned." Maya smiled and clinked her cup against his. "To kindness," she repeated. Outside the restaurant, the city lights glowed softly against the night sky, while inside the Golden Spoon a different kind of light filled the room, the kind that comes from truth and humility. As they sat there together, Maya whispered, "Do you think she'll change?" Ethan looked toward the window where he could see Clara's car still parked outside. "I hope so," he said quietly. "Sometimes one strong lesson is all it takes to make a person see the world differently." Maya nodded. "I hope she does. No one should live with that much anger." Ethan reached out and brushed her cheek softly. "You have a good heart, that's why I never worry about you. You forgive even when others don't deserve it." Maya smiled shyly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be treated unfairly. I never want to make someone feel that way." Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her with quiet admiration. "That's why, no matter how rich I become, I'll never let you change. You remind me of what truly matters." Maya's eyes softened. "And what's that?" Ethan smiled. "Love, respect, and kindness, the only things money can't buy." She nodded slowly, her smile warm and peaceful. For a moment, the whole restaurant seemed to fade around them, as if the world itself paused to listen. Outside, Clara finally started her car and drove off, her face still pale but her heart heavier with guilt and realization. She had been humiliated, yes, but deep inside she knew she needed it. For once in her life she saw the kind of person she had become, and the mirror wasn't kind. Back inside, Ethan gently helped Maya with her coat as they stood to leave. The staff and a few customers smiled at them as they walked past, whispering words of admiration. Ethan opened the door for her, and as they stepped out into the cool night air, he looked up at the glowing restaurant sign and said quietly, "Sometimes the richest lessons come from the poorest moments." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder as they walked to their car, their hearts full not of anger or pride but of peace. The next morning the city woke up as usual, but for Clara nothing felt normal anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the Golden Spoon. The memory of Ethan's calm voice and Maya's forgiving smile haunted her every minute. She had spent the night tossing and turning in her giant bed, surrounded by luxury, yet feeling completely empty inside. The words kept repeating in her head. Respect isn't about who people are, it's about what's right. When she looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection didn't look powerful anymore. It looked tired, small, and lost. For the first time, she didn't like the person staring back at her. She tried to brush it off by calling her friend for coffee, but even her friend was distant, polite, but cold after witnessing her behavior. "I have errands today, maybe some other time," her friend said quickly before hanging up. Clara stared at the phone, realizing how fast people walk away when you're no longer the center of attention. She sighed and decided to go out alone, hoping to clear her mind. As she drove through the busy streets, she saw people rushing to work, taxi drivers, shouting, vendors selling flowers on corners, and waitresses in uniforms walking fast to catch buses. Suddenly she noticed a little girl on the side of the road selling roses, her dress old, but her smile bright. Something inside Clara softened. She parked the car and walked over. "How much for a rose?" she asked gently. The girl smiled and said, $1, ma'am." Clara handed her a 20 and said, "Keep the change." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? Thank you," she said cheerfully, and ran to her mother nearby to show her the money. Clara smiled faintly, watching them hug. For the first time in years, she felt a small spark of real joy, not from spending, but from giving. Meanwhile, at the Golden Spoon, Ethan and Maya arrived together later that afternoon to check on the staff. Everyone greeted them with respect and smiles. The manager came forward saying, "Sir, everything is going smoothly. Thank you again for yesterday. It taught all of us something." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good, I'm glad," he said. Maya walked around the restaurant, greeting her co-workers, who were still calling her Miss Maya, shyly unsure how to act around the owner's wife. She laughed softly and said, "Just call me Maya, please, nothing has changed." They smiled, feeling more comfortable. Around the same time, the restaurant doors opened, and everyone looked up in surprise because Clara walked in. She wore simple clothes, no heavy jewelry, no fancy makeup, just a plain dress and a nervous look on her face. The staff stiffened, unsure of what to do. Maya saw her first and walked over slowly, her expression calm but curious. "Hello, Clara," she said softly. Clara swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "Maya, I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. I was horrible to you, and I can't stop thinking about it. You didn't deserve that." The restaurant was silent again as everyone listened. Maya smiled gently. "I forgave you yesterday, remember?" Clara nodded quickly. "Yes, but I needed to say it properly, not just to you, but to everyone." She turned to the staff and said loudly, "I treated someone badly because I thought she was beneath me. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to admit it." A few waiters nodded respectfully, while others looked surprised at her honesty. Ethan walked up beside Maya, his eyes calm. "It takes courage to come back here," he said simply. Clara nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Yesterday I went home and realized I have everything money can buy, but nothing that truly matters. Seeing how you both handled me with grace made me see how empty my life is. I don't know how to thank you, but I promise I'll change." Maya placed a gentle hand on her arm and said, "Change doesn't need a promise, Clara, just action. Start small, be kind to people around you, that's enough." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Maya, I will." She looked at Ethan and said softly, "You're a lucky man." Ethan smiled faintly and replied, "I know I'm lucky." Clara gave one last nod and left quietly, but this time when she walked out there was no arrogance in her steps, only humility. As the door closed behind her, Ethan turned to Maya and said, "See, even Karma knows how to work fast." Maya laughed softly. "Sometimes all it takes is one mirror moment." Ethan nodded, agreeing. And she finally saw herself clearly. The staff slowly went back to work, their spirits lighter than before, and the rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. Outside, Clara walked down the street, still wiping her eyes but feeling strangely free, like she had dropped a heavy weight she'd carried for years. She stopped by a flower stall, bought 2 roses, and handed one to a homeless woman nearby. The woman smiled and whispered, "God bless you, dear." For the first time, Clara whispered back, "Thank you," and for the first time she truly meant. At that evening, the sky turned golden as the sun slowly disappeared behind the tall buildings, painting the city with soft orange light. Inside the Golden Spoon, everything felt peaceful. The rush was over, the tables were clean, and the smell of coffee and warm bread filled the air. Maya sat near the window, resting after another long day, her eyes following the glowing lights outside. Ethan walked toward her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, his tie loosened and his expression relaxed. He placed 1 cup in front of her and smiled. "You did well today," he said softly. Maya looked up at him and smiled back. "So did you," she replied. "You handled everything with calm and grace." Ethan chuckled. "I just followed your example." They both laughed quietly. After a few moments of silence, Maya spoke again, her voice soft but thoughtful. "It's strange, isn't it, how fast life teaches lessons? Yesterday she humiliated me, today she came back to apologize." Ethan nodded, sipping his coffee. "That's how life works, Maya. Sometimes it humbles people quickly because it knows pride can't stay long." She looked down at her cup, thinking, "I'm glad she came back, not because I needed her apology, but because it shows there's still hope for people like her." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand gently. "You always see the good in everyone, that's your gift." Maya smiled shyly. "And you always protect me, that's yours." He smiled. "Together we make a good team, then." They sat quietly for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence. The manager passed by and whispered softly, "Good night, sir, good night, ma'am." They smiled and nodded back. The lights in the restaurant dimmed slowly, leaving only the warm glow from the candles near the windows. Ethan stood up and held out his hand. "Come, let's go home." Maya took it without hesitation, rising to her feet. As they walked out of the restaurant side by side, she looked around one last time at the place that had given her both pain and pride in the same day. Outside, the cool night breeze brushed her face, and she closed her eyes for a second, breathing deeply. "You know," she said softly, "working here taught me something important. No matter where you are or what you do, you can still meet people who test your kindness, but that doesn't mean you should lose it." Ethan smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful thought, Maya." She looked at him and said, "And you taught me that love isn't about showing power. It's about standing beside someone even when the world misunderstands them." He squeezed her hand gently. "Always," he whispered. They began walking toward their car under the soft city lights, their shadows stretching long behind them. As they reached the corner, Maya stopped and looked back at the glowing sign of the Golden Spoon. "Do you think people will remember what happened?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Maybe, but more importantly, I think they'll remember how they felt watching it. People don't forget kindness, Maya, they carry it." She nodded, her heart full of quiet peace. The sound of distant traffic and soft laughter filled the air as they drove away, leaving behind not just a restaurant but a story that had touched everyone who saw it. Across the city, Clara sat at her desk writing in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. Her words were simple but sincere. "Today I met a woman who reminded me that true grace has nothing to do with wealth, but everything to do with kindness. I hope I can be a better person tomorrow." She closed the notebook, wiped a tear from her cheek, and smiled for the first time without pretending. Somewhere far away, Maya and Ethan laughed together. As they reached home, their hearts light and full. The stars shone brighter that night, as if the universe itself approved. And as the screen faded to black, the words appeared quietly but clearly on the screen. "Respect costs nothing but means everything."